I said, I was tired this morning, and I said, I don't know why. And then I said, yes, I do. I had to pick my sister-in-law up at the police station at midnight. And then I started laughing. And then I started laughing. I said, please let me explain.
I knew it was going to happen someday.
And then I had to explain. So if anybody thought Tracy was really in the police, she was at the police station, but she was monitoring for a potential position that she'll hear more about on Wednesday. But I was just like, oh, I should explain myself. So people don't think bad things about her. Just some things coming up this week. Bible study tomorrow night, Genesis 13 and 14. Wednesday night is women's ministry and board meeting. So women's ministries will be meeting next door. Don't forget, if you want to bring your dinner, come and bring your dinner and eat. That is perfectly fine. We are doing Elijah, and we are finishing up week 2 on our own, and then we start week 3 on Wednesday. So it's been a great, I don't know if you've been really watching it and reading it every day, and I just really have loved the walkthrough. And sometimes I just shut the book and think, I don't want to, who is she to tell me? And then I realize she isn't telling me anything. The Lord is speaking, and that puts another whole thing on it. Thursday is prayer service with Pastor Terry. And then 10 o'clock on Sunday is our worship. We're doing the diaper drive for the Pregnancy Center is going on now. And then on the 21st is the baptism service. Sign up at the welcome table back in the back to do that. And I hope that you're finding ways to find joy. Because sometimes we can find ourselves in places where we would rather not be. And we think, Lord, there just is no way to find joy right here. And so it's hard, and you have to look for it deliberately. So if you're not looking for it, you might miss it. And yesterday, I was talking to Joe about it. I was out at this little festival in Ingleside with everybody else in the world. It was at Buck Days. So nobody was at the event except for maybe I spoke to about 100 people between the 2 days. And they didn't want to talk to me. I just stopped them and I talked to them. Because I was so bored. And for part of the day on Friday, I had somebody with me, but then from 2 until 6, I was all by myself. So there was nobody to talk to, so I had to talk to anybody that would listen. And so I did. And then it was just so windy then the next day, and I was having to have a hard time, and I was like, I don't want to be here. And then all of a sudden, I was standing there, and I was doing a little dance, and I was like, oh my gosh. And I had an ant in my pants, and it was biting me, and I went, and you know what? It changed my perspective on life for a few moments. And I thought, you know what? I need to pay a little more attention to my surroundings. But that little ant, there was an ant pile that happened to be near where I had been told to put my booth, and one of those little ants managed to get up my pants leg and bite me. Oh my goodness. And I had to run down there and just get that little ant out, and luckily he didn't bite me really hard, but it was enough to make me go, there is something there. And it brought my attention. And sometimes that's what joy does. Joy is like, look at me. I want you to look at me, because life can be hard, and it is hard, and the Bible tells us it's going to be. But what happens sometimes is we come to church on Sundays and we get filled with stuff. We get excited from praise and worship. Okay, first of all, this balloon is defective. It has a hole in it. And that's really almost what happens. And we get a little bit of joy. Or we get a little bit of something that we think is joy. And then we have fellowship. And we hear a good sermon. And then sometimes we get to go out to dinner after church, and we get to fellowship some more. And we think we have had all that we need to carry us through the week. And all of a sudden, we are like, I am full. Monday morning, we wake up, and boy, we are going. And we find ourselves by the end of Monday night empty and someplace we don't want to be. We have gotten ourselves just crazy, and there's no reason to be that way, because we didn't really do all the things that we needed to do. What we really needed to do, you can put it down, what we really needed to do is get in God's word every day. That Elijah study has made me get into his word and has made me study so I'm prepared when I come back. Getting in his word and bringing his spirit into us, he has a purpose for us. God has a plan for us in his life. I had a very interesting conversation with someone the other day. I was listening to somebody speaking, and they were talking about the difference between pagan gods and our God is that our God does not need our help. He does what he does with that. Now, he loves to interact with us, but he does not need us to fulfill his purpose. Pagan gods couldn't do anything without humans. That's why there's demigods and all those things in between, because they needed the people to provide something for them. But we got to get into God's word, and we fill ourselves with the Holy Spirit. And we need to fill ourselves with his word. And it says in Psalm 16:11, it says this to us. It says, no, come on. Pastor Terry's going to want to know because I can't touch anything. 16:11, thank you so much, because my phone's not working. 16:11, it says, you will make known to me the path of your life. You will fill me with your joy in your presence, with eternal pleasures at your right hand. He will fill us with his joy. But he doesn't want us just to let it go all willy-nilly. He wants us to have a purpose behind what we do. He has a purpose for us, and it is driven in a specific way. It says in Galatians 5:16, it says, so I say, let the Holy Spirit guide your lives. Then you won't be doing what your sinful nature craves. See, we have to grab a hold of all of those things. So Pastor Terry and Noah, I want you to come right over here, and you guys are going to help me. All right, you are going to stand right at this thing, and you're going to, Pastor Terry, blow up this balloon, and you are going to, and then you're going to attach it to that that straw. As much as you can, more. A little more. I know you got it in you. Okay, that should be good. All right, so our goal with the Holy Spirit is to point us toward Jesus. That's exactly what he does. And he points us in the right direction. And so you are going to tape that balloon to that, but you're going to take it back a little bit before you let it go. Stretch out the, I know. We're going to stretch this out.
Wording is hard.
I know.
Oh, stretch the string out.
String out, so it's straight. There you go. There we go. All right. And so we come to church, we study our word, we do all of those things, and then, okay, and it's not quite tight enough, but it points us in the right direction. It gets us to Jesus where we are supposed to be. Notice Jesus is on our bullseye, because the Lord has a purpose. And our purpose, our joy can't be complete unless we are with him. And that is where we want to head. And he has a plan for us. And he says, listen, follow my word and you will get there. You try to do it on your own, you're just, and it doesn't quite meet the mark. But when you get yourself into the Lord, and when you let his Holy Spirit guide you, joy is complete. And that is what he has said. He promises that he will make our joy complete in him. And the children are going to follow me.
That when she said, good sermons, she blew 2 breaths of hot air into that balloon. I said, all right, honey, I know that's subliminal. I know what you're doing. You think because the air isn't working today that it's going to be a short sermon. No, it's good. We are on week 4 now of our study called Created for Significance. And you saw a little bit on that video of what we will be discussing. Anyone who's had, more than one child, because someone told me that you're not a real parent unless you have more than one. My wife is an only child. You know, she understands that everything revolves around her in the world, and I let her believe that. But you know that with different children who have different characteristics, different personalities, you have to speak to them differently, right? When Mackenzie was coming up, our youngest, all I had to do, this is, the power of being a parent and physically intimidating as I am. All I had to do was look at her and say, I'm disappointed in you. Oh, and the tears would come and everything. With Kirsten, I couldn't even, she was more like Sharon. I couldn't even put her in time out. I'd sit her in a corner and say, now you sit there and think about it. And she would have these conversations with, I don't know, imaginary friends. And, or maybe she was, figuring out a plot to take Dad out, so he didn't put her in time out. With Matthew, like any boy, I would have to speak to him very plainly. There's no hinting around with Matthew. And he gets that honest, because I don't take hints very well either, apparently, according to Sharon. And I hit a button, and that wasn't the right button. But you have to speak differently to different children based on their characteristics and their personalities, right? Or if you're a part of a team or a group or a unit, you speak to the insiders in your team and group differently than you would speak to someone who's not in the group. And even within a group, you speak differently. There's divisions in the group as well. You may have someone who's casually committed to the group or the mission. And then you have those who are 100% in. Even within a group, you would speak differently depending on who you are speaking to and with. So that's just a dynamic of how we are. The past 3 weeks, we've been listening to Jesus tell some stories to one group in particular. And these are great stories. I mean, these stories are so rich that they've been written down in the Gospels. They've been told over and over again for the last, couple thousand years. So they're good stories. And the group that he's been talking to, speaking with, is a group of highly intelligent, highly educated, and in their minds, highly religious people. That's the Pharisees. We know who they are. So in Luke 14 and 15, Jesus has all these sorts of stories to tell this group of people. And that's important. If you've been here the past 3 weeks, you know that those stories are the grand banquet, where everyone is going to be around a table in heaven and have a great banquet. Then the story of the lost things from the last 2 weeks, the coin, the sheep, and the wayward son. If you haven't been here, you can look on our website or on YouTube and catch up with them. But while Jesus is telling those stories, he's also aware. He has the Pharisees here, but he's also aware he has some other people that are present and listening in, his disciples. And so, as is his fashion, he would tell the stories and speak to this group, and then he stops and turns and he talks to the insiders, the disciples. He teaches them. And this group, of course, is not opposed to him, whereas the Pharisees didn't like him so much. They would wish that he would be quiet and go away. But this group of insiders is so committed to him that they have bet the farm that this man, Jesus, is worth selling everything and giving it all up and following him for the rest of their lives and the rest of eternity, into eternity. So he teaches the Pharisees, and then he turns to his followers, and he talks to them for a while. And he tells this very intriguing story about another person who bet the farm, but he did it and was offending this other gentleman who was very kind and generous. He bet the farm on that man that he had mistreated. But because of the character of this man, his plans worked and his future prosperity was kind of locked in because of what he did. That's the story I want to tell you today, and it's in Luke 16. And let me just say this. If you're here and you're just trying to figure out, or watching online, you're just trying to figure out what all this stuff is about God and Jesus, you're not completely sold. You want to find out whether God is worthy to be trusted or what he says. If you'd want to trust your life to him, in essence, you're trying to figure that out, I think you're going to like the way this story ends, because it's pretty good. It's really good. And maybe you're a believer here, but you're not fully committed. You're kind of figuring out what your next steps are as you walk this journey of life, and you're wondering if you should commit fully, everything, bet the farm like the disciples did, and follow this man Jesus. You're going to want to take that step after you hear this story. And then, of course, the majority of us here, I know, are, well, I used to call them silver saints. If you had gray hair, you were a silver saint. But I'm getting gray hair, so I'm not going to call us that anymore. Spiritual soldiers, how's that? You're fully invested. You're committed 100%, everything to him. Your time and your talents and your treasures, your family, every fiber of your being, you've committed to Jesus. You're going to come to the end of this and just say, I am so glad that I'm following him. I am so glad I'm part of that group, that insider group. Basically, what I'm trying to say is there's something in this story, I believe, for everyone, no matter where we are on our journey with Jesus through life. In the past, and I'm going to do it this week, I've tried to pretend that we know absolutely nothing about that first century Palestinian culture. And so I'm going to give you all kinds of brain candy that you can chew on during the service. And you can take notes, but we don't give you a whole lot of room on our bulletin for notes, so write small. Okay, let's start with the very, very basics, elementary. We are in Luke 16, and that is the chapter, right after Luke 15. How's that for basic? Mathing is hard in the morning. Luke 16, and we'll be looking at verses 1 through 13. So Jesus has just finished talking to the Pharisees, and now he's turning to his disciples, and he tells them the story about the shrewd manager. Let me kind of summarize it for you. I'll give you the cliff notes for those of you who have a short attention spans, and because I'm right there with you. Story about a rich man, a noble man. And he finds out that he's being cheated by one of his employees, and he fires the employee. Then this employee, who does something very creative and unethical to ensure his future, and the twist of the story is that instead of being outraged, furious with this manager, the nobleman praises the manager for being a shrewd operator. Not a smooth operator. That's a different song. A shrewd operator. What did I do with my water? I am really, maybe it's the heat. I'm really dry this morning. Okay, shrewd operator. But this story, interesting enough, as I started to look at it and kind of pull it apart and look at some commentaries and some Bible scholars, this story has been debated for 2,000 years. Because it's confounded those that are logical, Western mind thinkers. Those of us from this country and other Western worlds. Because for the life of us, we can't understand why Jesus, or the character who's portraying God in this story, would praise someone who's unethical, who's done something unethical. And there's a lot of theories as to why he he puts this man in a positive light, or stories that say, this story isn't accurate, it isn't correct, why it's not correct, or it doesn't work with this story. But all of them, I think, kind of miss the point that's under the surface of this text. They miss the mark unless they know something about Middle Eastern culture. 30 minutes from now, you may know a little bit more about Middle Eastern culture, whether you want to or not. The story of the shrewd manager is a story, and let's do this. As I was writing this out, I thought, let's do it like a movie. I'm going to describe the script to you, and it comes in 4 scenes. The first scene is in the master's office. This is where this employee gets word that he's being downsized. He's being fired, let go, cut off, fired, whatever other words that we kind of hear a lot about in this down economy these days. He is no longer employed by the master. The second scene would be on the way to get the books. This is where some huge thinking goes on. He's trying to figure out what his next steps are going to be to secure a future for himself. And it also reveals the, unscrupulous character of the manager, and what he knows to be true about the master as well. This man that he's been cheating, even though this man has treated him very, very well. The third scene is with the books. This is where he puts his plan into action, and his action, the plan works perfectly. It's flawless. And then scene 4 is back in the master's office again. And this is where the climax happens in the movie. So let me walk you through each of these scenes so you can see them, digitally enhanced and in surround sound. Okay, maybe not. Go to Luke chapter 16. Let's read the first 3 verses. Jesus told his disciples, so now he's switched and he's looking over at them. There was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, "What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management, because you cannot be manager any longer." So scene 1, this is in the master's office. And in this scene, there are 3 characters that are introduced. Only 2 of them are in the room at this time. But the first character, of course, is the master, the landowner. He's a wealthy Middle Eastern landowner. Jesus calls him a rich man and tells us that the people in the area respect him so much. This is something that's not on the surface of the text, that they come to the master and tell the master, "You got a guy that's stealing from you." And that'll get even more important as we go on. Jesus' exact words are, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. And I'm in that Greek class. I'm almost done. Next Tuesday, I'll be done with Greek. But the tense of that verb is, it kind of indicates that there were multiple situations in the past where the master was told that this employee was cheating him. Embezzlement, all of that. So the master calls him in and asks him about it. He does it calmly and graciously. He doesn't accuse, doesn't berate him or threaten him or anything like that, demand repayment or put him in jail, which were all within his right to do. He could have. Because he doesn't, he is an impressive landowner. He's not like the typical guys out there, renting land out to essentially sharecroppers. And the second character in this room, in this scene, is the manager. He's an agent, a representative of the master. He's the middleman. We all hate the middleman. Sorry, Matt. But he manages property and assets that don't belong to him. They belong to the master. Only he's not managing them. He's mismanaging them. This employee is cooking the books to his own advantage. I read from Nancy, from the Mishnah, and it's a Jewish commentary of the Old Testament, and there were 3 kinds of managers that were legally recognized to play a management role in function in the life of Israel. And this man was what's called, if I'm pronouncing it right, Nancy, a shalua in the Hebrew. But when I looked in the Greek, that word is oikonomos. Doesn't that sound like our word, economist? So we kind of get an idea of what this manager looks like. He's an educated man who has worked his whole life with people and contracts and reports and paperwork. He's an agent hired by the master to negotiate and minister land contracts between tenants, peasants, and the master, to do what's best for the master and make sure that things are taken care of. Now, here's where the wrinkle comes in, because in the 1500s, the Ottoman Turks came in and conquered that land, and they divided up the land among themselves, and then they hired the people who owned the land previously to come and work it, and they got a percentage of the cut. But the peasants hated these people because they exploited them. They bled them dry. And they were usually absentee landlords. So they would hire managers like this manager who not only built them for the master's benefit, but also built them for his own personal benefit. There's a description from a man that I read in an article that has lived in this area for 15 years. And let me read that to you. The Turkish landowner is vividly remembered as corrupt, ruthless, and indifferent to any suffering he or his steward might cause his renters. But this scene is quite different from the one in the parable, isn't it? At the very beginning, someone cares enough about the master to let him know that he's got a problem, that this guy is stealing from him. I don't know if they had whistleblower laws, but these guys went forward and said, he's stealing from you, and you need to be aware of it. They were looking out for the welfare of the master, is the point. So this master is clearly a part of the community. He's invested in the community. He's well respected. He is not, the wealthy, distant, foreign, ruthless landowner. That's not in this story. And the third group in this scene is one that's not physically present, and they are the debtors, the tenants. The peasants, as some commentaries say, peasant farmers who live on the land as sharecroppers, essentially. And every year, each of them would negotiate with the master through his manager to farm a certain number of acres. And, as they brought it in, they got the right to farm, but they had to give a percentage, of course, to the master. It's wheat and olive oil, whatever product they happen to be farming. And it's the peasants here who've blown the whistle on this shrewd manager. That's the setup for the action, okay? The entire action of scene one takes place in 2 sentences, both from the lips of the master. The first sentence is a question. Master calls the manager into his office, and he says, "What's this I hear about you?" I've told you this story before about Kirsten. She was in 6th grade, and I happened to be standing inside the front door with my arms crossed, looking physically imposing and intimidating, as I always do. And she opens up the door, getting off the bus, and she sees me, and her eyes get really big. And I said, "Anything you want to tell me about?" And she spills her guts. She tells me everything wrong that she's done for that year, going back to like 3rd grade. And I didn't know anything was going on. I was just standing there, and I saw an opportunity to get some information. You can only use that once, by the way, because the others, they talk about it, and the other kids knew that I was trying to be wise as a serpent. "What's this I hear about you?" is what the master says to the manager. And the master is very careful with his words, the words that he chooses, just like I was with Kirsten. And he doesn't say, "I hear you've been cheating me. I hear you've been taking money, skimming money off the top." Because that, the master knows, would tip the manager, tip him off as to what he's heard and what he knows and what he doesn't know. So the landlord doesn't want to tell the manager everything or what he knows, because he wants to know everything of this employee, this jerk, what he's been doing to cheat him. So he says, "What's this I hear about you?" That's a great opening in any kind of a negative confrontation. All the listeners hearing Jesus' story would expect one and only one response from the manager. You know what that response is? Silence. The manager knows, just like Kirsten did not. that he can't tell him anything because he doesn't know what he knows. And he knows that he's done a lot. Jesus' story, the manager doesn't disappoint them. He gives the received answer, which is silence. The manager's smart enough to know and to not give away anything. Does he know everything? Or does he know just one or two situations which he might be able to, explain away? He doesn't want to confess any more than the master can currently prove. And so he stays quiet. Then the master delivers the second statement in this scene. He dismisses the manager. He says, you can't be my manager any longer. That translates in today's world, you're fired, get off the island, you're done. Don't let the door hit you on the way out, that type of thing. And back then, there was no 2 weeks notice or severance pay or unemployment insurance. He was just done. He only had one task that he has to complete. And all the listeners at this point would expect to hear a debate or an argument from that manager. He's going to plead his case, throw some excuses out there, blame maybe the peasants, it's a miscommunication, or even blame the master for some reason. And there are a lot of things that he can say to defend himself, and he doesn't do that. He can, he could do all kinds of things. I was going to talk about some of the excuses we hear today. If you turn on the news or people behaving badly, just Google it and watch some of it. It's crazy. So this is the time for him to explain why he's innocent. That's what the crowd is looking at when they're listening to Jesus' story. Oh, he's going to give the excuses. He's going to argue why he should keep his job. But to the surprise of the listeners of this story, he doesn't do that. He remains silent as well, in this one as well. Silence is extremely important in this setting. The manager he's agreeing. He's acknowledging a few things by his silence. First, that he's guilty. He has no words because he's guilty. And the master knows that he's guilty. That's the second thing he's determining. The third thing is that the master expects obedience, and disobedience will bring judgment. And the fourth thing is that he knows he can't get his job back by making excuses or arguing. So this manager, this shrewd manager, he doesn't dwell on how to get his job back. He instead starts thinking immediately of how to secure his future. All of his energy is focused on tomorrow, what's going to happen, what he's going to do, now that he's unemployed. And he goes through those things. He's not strong enough to dig, wells or ditches or whatever, and it's beneath his station to beg, so he has to find something to do. Before he leaves his boss's office, he begins processing everything in his mind, trying to weigh out all his options. And the master's told him he's fired. And the only other thing he has to do for the master is to return the books. So now what's he going to do? He's thinking about this as he leaves the office too. He closes the door and he thinks to himself, at least he didn't, throw me in jail. The Mishnah makes it quite clear that an agent was expected to pay for any loss out of his own money, and the master hasn't even asked him to do that. He's not even scolded him. He just releases him. And the manager's saying, he's a merciful man. He's generous and gracious because he did not what he could have done, but he did something very, very nice. And now the manager's walking into scene 2. Scene 2, on the way to get the books. The master said, give an account of your management in verse 2. Well, how does an accountant account for his work? He keeps records. In the Middle Eastern culture, when a person is fired, they're fired on the spot, as we've said. He's now powerless since he's been terminated, friendless and without a job. None of the villagers like him because he's been stealing from them as well. So he's got to do something. And he only has that one task left, turn in the books. So on his way, he's thinking furiously, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I don't have anything. That's verse 3. And he talks about those options that he had. But while he's walking, his mind is just furiously going through everything, and he hatches a plan. The plan is based on everything he knows, not about him and his strengths, but about the master and his reputation, that he's merciful and generous. He says, I've been manipulating in his mind, I've been manipulating another man's money for years, and everyone around here knows. I'm too weak for manual labor, and begging is beneath my social station. So what am I going to do? His problem is, who's going to hire him? And that answer is no one. They know him. They know his reputation. Nobody trusts him. He's a pariah in the community. He's a politician. No, that's not true. So he thinks and thinks and thinks, and he comes up with a solution, not based on, like I said, his reputation, but on the master's reputation. The solution is he's going to bet the farm, everything he has, his whole future ability to raise money and to provide for himself, on the master's mercy. After all, I mean, this is a man who was so kind. He didn't throw him in jail, didn't reprimand the manager with anything. He just let him go. He didn't demand restitution. He didn't make a fuss. This man is generous. This man is gracious and merciful. And he says, I know what I'll do. I'll stake my entire future on him and his reputation. And he does it. So scene 3, now he's with the books. And scene 3 reveals the plan that he's hatched. And like I said, I mean, it's ironic that his plan has everything to do with the master and nothing to do with him. The manager, he has to move fast, though, because if word gets out, the servants in the master's house probably already know that he was fired. His whole future depends on getting things done fast and changing the villagers' mindset and perception of who he is based on the master's generosity. So that's when we see what he does with the books. He no longer has any power or authority, but they don't know it yet. Everything that takes place in this scene, it comes from the mind of the manager, and it's based on 2 assumptions. The manager knows that for his plan to work, the debtors cannot know that he's been released of all of his authority. And they have to believe that he still works for the master and that the master has approved this plan. As soon as he gets back to the office, he finds one of the servants that says, summon all the debtors. Bring them in. And the peasants don't know that he's been fired, so they go and do it. They bring them all in. And as soon as the first tenant farmer shows up, he pulls his contract out of the file, and he says, quick, how much do you owe my master? And the farmer says, 800 gallons of olive oil, in essence. And the manager told him, take your bill, sit down real quick, and make it 400. That saves him 500 denarii. He calls the next one in, lays the contract in front, does the same thing, and he says, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat. He says, take your bill and make it 800. That's another, he's basing it on financial worth, not amounts. So that's another 500 denarii. It's a monetary value. He knows he has to complete these deals and get them signed before a servant walks in there and says, hey, I just heard you got fired. And then it all falls apart. So he's moving as quickly as he can. And then he would go to jail if that happened. Now, the second assumption that he has is that the debtors must hold is that the master has approved of his debt reduction plan. Because if not, they're not going to go along with it. They'll never change their perceptions of him, and he has no future at all. So lightning fast, he puts it all together, and one by one, the tenant farmers come in. He reduces their bills, has them sign, and this is that great betting of the farm. Everything is put into this one basket, the mercy and graciousness of the manager. That master is generous and merciful. And if that's true, if the master really is generous and merciful, then he'll be okay. The manager will. If he's wrong, it's, Jewish Folsom prison or something, and he'll be singing the blues with Morgan Freeman. If he's wrong, or Johnny Cash, that's who that was, yeah. If he's wrong, he's going to prison. So he bets everything on it, and he stakes everything on this one thing, absolutely everything. Now, reducing of the bills in this culture isn't unheard of. It's very rare. But usually, it happens when there's a drought, or trees are damaged, or some other natural disaster that means the tenants aren't going to be able to pay the rent because their production has been cut. So That it usually comes from the tenants to the master. It never comes from the master down to reduce their rent. You know, it'd be like a car salesman. You bought a car at a dealership, and he calls you and says, "So, did you get the check?" And you're like, "What check?" "Well, we talked about it, and we lowered the price of the vehicle by $500, and you're getting a check." That never happens. If it does, I want to know what dealership. And this is interesting. Each farmer is blown away when he hears about this debt reduction. Rent reduction. They all wonder how they could be so fortunate. They hit the lottery. And the manager's only too happy to tell him. He's going to say, it's me. I went to the boss and I said, "Hey, can we give them all a break this year?" And he said, yes. So I convinced him to do something. I caught him on a good day. Let's get this done. And, he would absolutely do that because he wants to set himself up for tomorrow. And do the villagers respond? Oh, yeah, they do. I would love to get a rebate check from, anyone. You want to write me a rebate check, I'll take it, and I'll say good things about you. And that's exactly what happens. The manager gives them their rebates of 500 denarii, which I wanted to look that up. The cost of that isn't $5,000. It's $50,000 equivalent. So they're getting $50,000 back from this manager. That's an amazing, gift. And who's your favorite person now today? The manager. So as quick as he can, he does that, and he gathers up all those contracts, fresh, the ink is still wet, and he races to the master's office. And this is scene 4, back in the master's office again. And this is where, to those who understood how things work in Middle Eastern cultures, everything becomes clear. As the manager reaches the master's office, he throws the contracts down. The master can see immediately what's happened. He's no dummy. He can hear the evidence too, because you get a $50,000 rebate check. You're going to be singing praises and throw a party, and you're going to make sure that you tell people how great and generous and merciful the master is. And he hears that happening out in the streets in front of his house. They're throwing a party, praising their generous patron. Never before has a master reduced the rent like this, and the sound of 3 cheers and all of that stuff goes up. So the master realizes he has 2 options here. He can go to the farmers and say, "I'm sorry, that was a mistake. That manager was terminated. He had no authority." And then he goes from a marvelous man to mud in one fell swoop. Or he can just go along with it and say, "Yes, I decided to do this because I'm a great guy." And there's no question as to what he's going to do because of the Middle Eastern culture that he lives in. Reputation or money, those are his 2 choices. He turns to the manager and he says, "Well played. Shrewd move. You're a jerk, but you're a smart jerk." Middle Easterns tell stories about that. Condemned man who his wife goes to the Sultan, and she doesn't beg for mercy for him. She says how great and merciful the Sultan is. And everyone hears her saying that, and he releases the prisoner, her husband. Reputation is everything in the Middle Eastern culture. It wouldn't happen if you went to our president and did that, I don't think, because our system isn't set up that way. But the Bible says in Proverbs 22:1, "A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold." That's their mindset. That's what they absolutely believe. See how this story kind of nets out? It's how it's moving out. It's about a master who's generous and merciful, and about a man who has assets that are only under his control for a short period of time. And he doesn't control his own destiny, and he knows it, and it's all in the master's hands. The question is, will the manager think about his situation? Will he make the most of this only opportunity of his life, for his life? While he has assets at his disposal, is he going to squander them, or will he use them to ensure a prosperous future. Jesus is saying this: the shrewd move is to trust the master. It's plain and simple. The shrewd move is to bet the farm that he is generous and merciful. There was a question that I think Billy Graham asked this question in an interview, and he said, what are you going to do with your one and only life that will last for eternity? That's a powerful question to ask. And I think that's pretty close to the question that Jesus is asking in this parable. He's talking to his disciples. What are you going to do with the one asset you have? A shrewd guy uses what he has to gain a future for himself. In the verse that immediately follows the story, Jesus gives the first of three lessons from the story, and we'll go through these quickly. He says, I tell you, use your worldly wealth to gain friends, verse 9, for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Translated, that's, you only have one life. Use it to enhance your future. Use it to build friendship with people who can say to you someday in heaven, I'm here because of what you did. I'm here because you were generous and merciful. I'm here because you shared something that was more valuable than gold or silver, and I met Jesus because of you. There are multitudes of people, I can tell you, who can say that that verse changed their lives. It made them ask, what should I do with what's been given to me? And it has to be answered by each one of us. Invest it in making friends for eternity. That's what God says, what Jesus is saying. The prospect of this is too enticing to ignore. Does it make you start dreaming about opportunities to do that? I'm telling you, go to lunch with Bob. You'll see how he invests in eternity with strangers that he meets. I was going to say my kids are still traumatized by my asking waiters and waitresses how we can pray for them. They're like, Dad, don't do that. It's investing in the future. It's investing. My treasure is in heaven. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Maybe we can start thinking about that in regards to where we are in life. And some of you have stories about that very thing. I love to hear them. So I want you to picture this. That new Christ follower is coming up to you years from now in heaven, and he says, hey, thanks. You opened your relationship, your friendship to me. You opened your church to me. You opened your life to me, and I found Jesus. So I'm here, in part because of you. Wouldn't that be amazing? When that happens, it's going to be incredible for us. I want heaven to be a place where, they welcome me and all of my friends because we helped steer each other to that place. And sometimes I think we lose that in the busyness of our minds. The second lesson that Jesus teaches at the end of the story is this. He says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you haven't been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who's going to trust you with true riches? And if you've not been trustworthy with someone else's property, who's going to give you property of your own? That's verses 10 through 13. I think it's Jesus' way of asking, do you want a big kingdom assignment or do you want a little kingdom assignment? Do you want a little assignment here and there? And I think those three verses are asking the question, what do I want entrusted to me? On a personal level, we have to ask ourselves that question. The principle behind that question is, the better I invest what I have, my life, the more will be entrusted to me. And it'll continue to grow. And the final lesson that Jesus says in those verses right after is that no servant, very familiar, no servant can serve two masters. Either will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You can't serve both God and money. And they use a word called mammon. It's more than just money, but that's how some of the translators, the Bible versions give it. This verse asks the question, can I invest my life in two places? Can I work on my own and stockpile over here and then come over here into God's stockpile and invest there as well? Can I sit on the fence? Can I have it both ways? And what's the answer to that? No. Jesus is very, very clear. You can't serve two masters. So this morning, I guess, I want to invite all of you who feel like you're on the fence about becoming fully committed, devoted to Christ. I want you to hop down off that fence and bet the farm. Bet everything on this man, Jesus, on what God has provided for us through him. If you're just giving a little, stop that. Give it all. Bet the farm on Jesus. You know, I've tried to each week during the series give an assignment that we would work with God during the week at home. This week's assignments are, remember I talked about continue praying. God, I don't ask you, I just ask that you give me your heart for lost people. I don't want a whole lot. I just want your heart for lost people. Continue to pray that this week. There are plenty of lost people out there. I think, we prayed about it this morning in the back room. I think there's an awakening about to happen in our country. Not with the powerful and prestigious and wealthy, not with the Pharisees, but with the Generation Z and X and the millennials. I think there's an awakening that we're going to see start to happen because they've searched everywhere else for answers out there and haven't found them. So why not try God? You bet the farm and put all of your assets in with Jesus, and when that awakening begins to happen on the streets, they will come to you because it's very obvious who you trust. The second thing that I would ask you to do is to ask God, how do you want me to invest my one asset, my life, my one and only life? When you've heard back from God, tell someone. Tell a fellow, I don't know what we call ourselves, LWCers. How about Jesus followers? Tell another Jesus follower. Tell an elder. Tell someone. Let us know what God said back to you. Now, I realize in about 2 minutes, we're going to leave and go out into this chaotic and loud world. So before we go, I want to give you just a brief minute, 30, 45 seconds, to spend some time to let God tell you, but also for you to talk to God about what you're thinking about with him in regards to investing